Hi, my name is Ravit Ortiz, and I'm part of the Health and Performance team here at Google. And we are thrilled to have you here today and engage in today's discussion. In celebration of Women's History Month, we welcome Dr. Sara C. Mednick to discuss her new book, The Power of Downstate: Recharging Your Life Using Your Body's Own Restorative Systems. If you're like most people, the relentless daily grind of go, 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 do, can run down your energy and deplete your resources. While most of us find our lives full of upstate moments that rev up our stress engines, it does not have to be this way. World renowned sleep researcher Dr. Mednick shows us how we can access the most replenishing and repairing aspects of sleep through activities and moments that happen during our day by diving into our downstate. Explaining that bringing ourselves back to the downstate is crucial for our health, well being, and cognitive longevity. The power of the downstate offers practical, evidence based insight on how we can all enable these systems to work together in better harmony. Dr. Sara Mednick is a professor of psychology at the University of California, Irvine, where she directs the Sleep and Cognition Lab. Her first book, Take a Nap, Change Your Life, fantastic book, puts forth the scientific basis for napping to improve productivity, cognition, mood, and health. Her lab investigates the mind and body mechanism, that support performance and improvement. Her work has been continuously federally funded with grants from the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and many more organizations. Plus, she's been interviewed by every major magazine and newspaper, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and the BBC. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat, to the YouTube chat. And with that, let's welcome Dr. Sara C. Mednick. Hello.
Hi, Ravi. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. So I would like to start off with fatigue because I feel that it's important to acknowledge that there is high levels of fatigue happening, whether it's individually or even global fatigue with all the stressors that are going on and how it's affecting us in different ways and different challenging ways. As someone with your expertise, I would love to know, how does fatigue affect the brain? What does it look like for the brain?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great way to start the conversation. Um, I think we need to make some definitions because fatigue is a really big word and it's used interchangeably for a lot of different ideas. So I see fatigue as happening at three levels. First is at the neural level, which is a task dependent, experience dependent, in the moment fatigue, where you're depleting the resources of glucose, glycogen, ATP, those little stores of energy that we have at the neural level. Then there's fatigue due to sleep loss, right? So maybe even at the end of the day, you start to feel fatigue. But also, if you haven't been sleeping well, there's also a type of fatigue that's specifically due to sleepiness and isn't related to that neural fatigue. It's just we have a homeostatic need for sleep. And so when we get to that high level of fatigue, we need to go to sleep. And then there's a psychological motivational fatigue. And that's the kind of fatigue that wears down your motivation, can contribute to chronic stress, this kind of feeling of if you have a constant level of, the barrage of news, the bad news, right? 24-hour news cycle, a stressful job, having to multitask in many different ways. So that is really a constant level of kind of psychological fatigue that can build up. And eventually, if not really met with a good balance of restorative and replenishing activities, can lead to burnout. So I started my research career, my dissertation was on the fatigue at the neural level. So I was studying what I call perceptual deterioration. And what that means is I had people doing a simple visual task, kind of like a video game. And I had them doing it 4 times in one day, in the morning, right before lunch, after lunch, and in the evening. And what I found was that the brain cannot continue to do the same task all day long. It just starts to decrease in performance. And it's a very specific type of decrease that even if I motivated people to say, listen, your performance is going south and I really need you to perform at your best, there was nothing. I gave them money, I gave them other kinds of motivational perks, and nothing could actually prevent that neural fatigue. And we know it's neural because I had control tasks where I could actually switch the target, the visual target, to a different place in the screen using a new, fresh area of the brain, and their performance would go back to their best performance of the day. So it's really like, it's really about this idea that we have a certain amount of resources. And once you start draining those resources without replenishing them, you're not going to be able to maintain your performance.
Wow.
So, yeah, and so that actually prompted the first book, because what I discovered was that that type of fatigue could only be ameliorated by this amazing invention called the nap. And it was a really surprising effect, because daytime sleep was able to keep people, a short nap, 20 to 30 minutes, was able to keep people at just maintaining their performance, but a longer nap was able to get them at their best performance. And then an even longer nap allowed them to show the same benefits as a full night of sleep. Um, and that prompted the, take a nap, change your life, that whole series of ideas that you could actually engineer your nap to have, better memory or better alertness or better creativity, better perceptual processes, depending on what type of sleep you got, how long you were napping, when you napped. And it prompted the nap wheel, which is on my website. And just, this whole idea that we could infiltrate this go 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 culture, and as a nap could be a tool. It could be a tool to keep us going, get us smarter, faster, stronger, all of that stuff that seemed so important um, back then, 20 years ago. And 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 so that at that time the nap was really a great answer, because it wasn't like caffeine that was going to mess up your sleep, and it wasn't like um, you didn't need Adderall all day long to keep you awake, and then of course mess up your sleep, and it was healthy and it was good for you.
So can I ask how I feel like a lot of times people view sleep as a bank, even though it isn't, in a lot of ways. But how how does that long-term exhaustion affect with trying to almost catch up on sleep? I feel like I always hear people saying, I need to catch up on sleep, or um, I know in your book, in your first book, you had mentioned there's that go, 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 and then people try to cram everything in the weekend to sleep better. But how does that affect with like long-term exhaustion, and how does like someone work through that to not be in that state?
Yeah, it's a great question. Can we, yeah, bank our sleep, sleep in on the weekend, and have that make up for the 5 days of super stress and poor sleep, and probably not really taking a lot of time for self-care during the week, right? And then say, well, I'll just eat well on the weekend, I'll sleep well on the weekend, I'll take a walk on the weekend, right? So the truth is that we have so much wear and tear that goes on in our brains and our bodies on a daily basis, that concept of taking care of yourself later actually doesn't make up for the daily wear and tear that the stress of life causes. And that really, there's even studies that show, recent studies that show that poor sleep on a daily basis when you're in your 40s. So there's two different things I want to say. One is that poor sleep in your 40s and 50s can predict your risk of getting dementia and Alzheimer's in your 70s, right? So there's a
Wow.
long-term issue that you can't bank it and retire and then start sleeping. That's number one. But then there's another interesting, more acute study that showed that even one night of sleep deprivation or poor sleep leads to increased buildup of the toxins that lead to the plaques that are found in
Oh,
dementia and Alzheimer's. And even one night can actually just lead to some amount of buildup that doesn't get taken care of by more sleep, because the sleep that you have the next night is taking care of the day you just had, right? So even it's there's a daily accounting. And so when you have, say, 5 hours, 5 days of poor sleep, you can't physically make up for that with, a couple of mornings of sleeping in. And the other thing I'd like to say about that is that the type of sleep that is the most important for cleaning out those toxins, something that happens in a system called the glymphatic system, which is basically this sort of plumbing system in the brain that on the nightly basis washes these toxins out of your brain. That happens in the first part of the night, in the sleep that you have in the first part of the night. So when people think about going to sleep late and sleeping in, you actually don't get the benefit of that type of cleansing sleep
wow.
if you're thinking about I'll sleep in on the weekend. So there's the daily wear and tear, but then there's also this misnomer about the sleep on the in the morning is the same as the sleep in the night, and it's definitely not.
That's interesting. And I love how you were talking about how it affects in three ways. And I know in your new book, you do talk about the neuron and how it goes basically into an upstate and a downstate. So, with that, I'd love to talk about the Rev and the Restore that you talk about in your book, which I think is brilliant. You talk about the upstate, which is a lot of that gathering information moments, and the downstate of processing all the information that you've collected. So I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, great. I'm super excited to talk about this idea because I think it's actually it's the piece that's missing in the way we think about how to get through our days and how to live long, healthy lives. So one of the things that I started noticing in my lab was I was looking at the EEG in the brain activity, and I was looking at the ECG, looking at the autonomic nervous system activity, and looking at how during waking and sleep, there seems to be a trade off in our more excitatory activities and then our more sort of recovery, replenishing activities. And this was true, as you said, at the single neuron where there's a firing of a single neuron and then it goes through a refractory period. It's also true in the waking day and then sleep. It's also true in the autonomic nervous system, as you said, that we have these two branches. One is the stress response, which I call Rev, and the other one is the mollifying recovery response, which I call Restore. And scientifically, they're called sympathetic and parasympathetic. But I actually really like the idea of Rev because you're revving when you're in that stress response,
Yeah.
and Restore, which is comes right after and tries to calm you down, restoring, your basic systems. So as I'm, doing this research, I realize that all of these processes have a rhythm, and we know that the world is based on, every cell in our body has a circadian rhythm which follows the sun and the moon. and metabolism, sleep wake alertness. All these things are really focused on the sun and the moon. But what I realized was that we weren't really thinking about this at a much larger scale. And actually, every living thing on the planet follows a rhythm. And why is that important to really understand? Because the rhythm gives you two sides. Every rhythm has two sides. One is the active side, which is what I call the upstate. That's where you have all of the energy and resources that you need to go, 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 and do, do, do. And then right after that upstate is always followed by an equal downstate, which is the time where your body has to go into restore mode, has to replenish, it has to rebuild, it has to repair. And the rhythm that every animal and plant and bacteria follow has these two sides. But we've been basically not aware of this and sort of doing everything possible just to feed the upstate stuff and not seeing how important it is to really consider and respect the downstate, because it's actually just as important, because the downstate that you have now is going to predict how well you produce in the upstate. And I think about it as, an ocean wave that's crashing on the beach. There's always two sides to that wave, right? There's the crashing and then the drawing inward. And that drawing inward is what actually gives the crashing part its energy and its motion and its speed and its power. And you can't have a wave that just crashes and crashes and crashes. Well, all animals are exactly the same. All living things are exactly the same. They need that restorative half to have the upstate be powerful.
Yeah. Um, there's a quote in your book that really stuck out to me, in the beginning of the book that you wrote, most of us live our lives as the human equivalent of smartphones running on 10% battery power, which again is like the ocean just constantly crashing, crashing, crashing. And it's interesting that you even use the word crashing, because I think that's how a lot of people feel a lot of the times when they're in that constant upstate, um, throughout their entire day. Um, I'm curious what research has shown on the impacts for the mind and the body, because people are constantly trying to still keep going and going and going.
So I think that's a really good question, right? Because there's obviously um, many different levels of analysis that you can bring this upstate downstate question to. You could talk about nutrition, you could talk about exercise, we could talk about wake and sleep, and we can talk about the rev and restore. But what is it really, what do we really care about? We really care about that we are going to have peace of mind, that we care. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I think in general, people want to self actualize, right? They want to self realize, they want to have a strong purpose in life and feel powerful. Well, I don't think that you can, there's this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs where there's these very basic needs of food and water and shelter and sleep. Part of that I think we need to reintegrate is having a strong recovery process, because I don't think
Yeah.
that you can actually exceed at the top levels of the pyramid. It's actually one of the tenets of that theory that you can't advance to the next level without having the bottom level be satisfied to some extent. So feelings of safety, feelings of having the energy and the resources, that actually predicts whether we'll be able to be great in our lives. And and so I think you also asked about mindfulness kind of stuff, right? Did you?
I did, because I'm curious about the mindfulness aspect of it, because I'm wondering of what else we can do throughout the day to
Exactly.
kind of tap into that downstate.
Yeah, exactly. So there's many different things that we can do. In the book, I really talk about sort of the autonomic things, the sleep things, the exercise, and the nutrition. And so in the autonomic, one of the things that's really important to think about is how um, and that's all the daytime stuff, right? How are we controlling and mollifying and calming down Rev? How much are we allowing Rev to take over our lives? And then what can we do on a daily basis, on a moment to moment basis, to take ourselves to a place of balance where Restore is at the eye level with Rev? And that occurs, it starts with your breath. The most,
Interesting.
one of the strongest signals to your body that you are in control, that you're safe, that you have mastery over your environment is your breath. When you're panicky, your breath starts to get shallow and fast. And
Yeah.
that's one of the strongest signals that you're having a rev overload. You're getting into some sort of state where you're not able to control your physiology or your emotions. When we take a deep, slow breath, we actually send a really strong signal that we got this, right? And that is why all of the mindfulness work, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, all of these practices really are based in the breath. Because what you're doing is very strongly putting Rev Restore at the front, front and center, and putting Rev on the side and saying, don't worry, I got this. So the mindfulness techniques that work on calming you down, but using your breath, yoga, which is every move, is literally
Yeah.
a breath. And the yoga teachers just say, okay, inhale, and you know what you're supposed to do. Exhale, you know what you're supposed to do. So the breathing, the mindfulness techniques, the compassion work that I think you're also thinking about as well, all that stuff, the reason why there's a practice of HRV biofeedback where you can use an app or a device that can get your breathing and your heart rate aligned with each other. And what that's doing is you intentionally calming yourself down and intentionally controlling your breath. And there's another concept I'd like to bring up, which comes out of rhythms. Having rhythms doesn't just give you upstates and downstates and make sure that you have both and make sure that they're both equally important. The other important feature of being a rhythmic person or a rhythmic animal is that rhythms can resonate with each other. So what that means is resonance is a term from physics, and basically, it's this idea that if two rhythms are in phase with each other, their upstates and downstates are occurring at the same time, both of those rhythms actually become more powerful. The signals are amplified. And this is true for breathing.
Yeah.
So when you slow your breath down, you get into what's called resonant breathing because your inhale is aligned with your increase, the rhythm of your heart rate. So you have a slow inhale, which brings a lot of oxygen into your lungs at the same time that your heart is suddenly starting to beat faster. And then on the exhale, when your heart naturally starts to beat slower, you you exhale, is right. So it's a more efficient system. It allows you to bring more oxygen into the lungs, into the blood, and it's calming, cleansing, all those things. So that's why this slow, deep breathing also is powerful because it brings you into resonance, which increases restore function.
Yeah, and I love how when you do it individually, how it affects you, but I think about when you hug somebody that you really care about, um, I've noticed that there's usually a sigh or a nice deep exhale that happens, and I feel that, you know, both of us, the hug helps almost with that restorative, um, work that our body really needs to do, which is great. Um, and it's really interesting because I've been thinking a lot about how currently I feel like a lot of people want to biohack their body, where they want to collect as much data as possible, not to find the rhythm, but basically how to maximize production and effectiveness on a daily basis. And some examples would be consuming a lot of caffeine to right to biohack as your productivity in the morning and then taking medications to go to sleep at night. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on how this affects our long-term well-being.
Yeah. I've taken to sort of, um I've taken to kind of look a little bit down on the concept of biohacking, because as somebody who's worked in, programming, I know what a hack is. A hack is a quick and dirty way for you to get to the same place as a more elegant approach, right?
Mhm.
And so there's this concept of like, I want to biohack my way to this end goal. And you could sort of, and now it's been turned into, um, any good thing that you do for yourself is now considered a biohack. Like you're somehow getting away with something and you're doing it in a quick and
That's
dirty way.
interesting.
And I think that there's something a little, to me, that is a real example of where we're at with our sense of ourselves and our sense of the environment, our sense of the universe and how we fit into it. Is that we're somehow trying to get away with something. And to me, another way of thinking about it that's not really the biohack mode is just saying, I'm just going to do what nature tells me to do, right? I'm actually just going to align my behaviors, eating, exercise, awake activities, with this natural upstate that is been given to me by the sun, and
Mm.
align my downstate activities with this natural downstate that's been given to me by the moon. And when you start to think about it outside of that trying to get away with murder kind of approach, I feel like you just sort of start to see how everything that you do is somehow either contributing to and like in the right phase with that rhythm, or in anti-phase, right? That it's kind of working against it. And that to me is sort of a it's a less violent and
Yeah,
kind of um, kind of somehow sneaky way of trying to just live your life.
yeah, that really resonates. I actually I love how you just said that. And actually in both of your books, I found that there's a lot of power in giving permission to take a nap, to take care of yourself for self-care. And I'm finding with self-care, you need self-compassion because otherwise it's just trying to tick off all these boxes of, see, I'm doing all of these things, but it's not coming from a compassionate place. Um, and so, with that, I would love to know how we can have more compassion about taking breaks, rest, restoring, recovering for ourselves and for the people around us.
Yeah, this is really where the rubber hits the road, right? It's so you can learn all about these things and think, oh yeah, this is all the things I should be doing. This is what my community should be doing. This is what my job should be doing. But until we actually do them and support each other in doing them, they're useless, right? They're totally useless ideas. So there's the individual, as you said. There's your internal, there's your social group, your social nexus of people that are actually really influential with each other, right? Um, and then there's the structures beyond our control, which are in the hands of our bosses, and in the hands of our mayors, and in the hands of our president, and Congress. How do we support um, recovery, downstate, replenishment, so that people can be at their best selves um, on a regular basis? this is a huge, huge question. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I find it, I mean, if I may, I find it almost it's a privilege to be able to have time to downstate the way in a lot of socioeconomic groups, they don't have access to green space, clean air, water, and um, I- you know, I I I feel like it's such a privilege to be able to take a nap, or it is such a privilege to know to stop and to pause. And I'm just wondering how we can work collectively, right? As we were talking about the breathing and how we can teach and work together and educate people and share this really valuable information that affects all of us on a cellular level.
Yeah, this is so important. I will even add to what you were saying about access. You mentioned access to downstate type of activities, exercising, green spaces, taking breaks, and then you mentioned also education about the importance of all these things. But then there's also the personal experience of stress that is different for people in lower socioeconomic
Yes.
strata, right? And then there's people of color who experience a completely different day-to-day level of microaggression or outward aggression, right? And there's many different ways in which where you stand on the pyramid can affect how much upstate you're experiencing on a daily basis, and then how much downstate you require to really create that good ratio between the two. And this is, of course, why people of lower socioeconomic status, people of color, particularly women of color, have more chronic stress and have more risk for chronic diseases, right? So there's a major implication for what we're talking about for health on a large global basis, that I think is so super important to talk about. And it's not just you know sleep hygiene education isn't going to solve it. Like,
Yeah.
that's important. But it's one
It's one
thing,
piece.
right?
Yeah.
It's one piece, and it's great, and it's rarely actually taught. And even in medical science, doctors don't even get real sleep classes, and so that's not even presented most of the time for um, your interactions with your own physician, right? They don't really ask you about this kind of stuff, but they definitely don't ask you about all the other downstate stuff as well, right? Like, how much are you doing deep breathing, right? How much are you engaging in exercise? What type of exercise? How deep is your community? How
Mm,
many hugs are you getting, right? So there's
yeah.
there's all that stuff, right? And then there's um, the food deserts, or what's also called food apartheid. How
Yeah.
much access do you have to fresh fruit and vegetables? How much crap are you eating on a daily basis? Because that's actually the only food available for 10 miles,
Yeah.
right? So,
And cost. There's also of the cost of nutrition too.
right. Yeah. Yeah. There's Michael Pollan says, pay more for your food. That's a privileged statement,
Yeah.
right? It's so important. And I think about it, I'm a single mom. I'm married, but my wife lives in New York and I live in San Diego. So I'm basically a single mom. And I think about paying more for my food all the time, but I'm a professor and I can do it. I constantly like, I want to save, but I also, and I just get like, oh, this is such a privilege to be able to know I can pay more for my food. But there's people who, should I pay for food or should I pay for new shoes? Right?
Yeah.
For my kid. So yeah, it's not just on the individual.
Yeah.
It's on the bosses. It's on Google, right? It's on your employers. It's on the big companies. It's on Amazon, right? It's on those big companies, and we put a lot of stress on the smaller companies, but it's really, I think, the big companies that have to be the um, the leaders in this because they can afford it.
And share the information, I think is also, as we are today, I think we're giving, hoping people
Yeah,
watch these talks so then they can understand and share information,
yeah.
for
So
themselves and their community. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so there are, newer programs that incentivize employees to get exercise, right? That they could be incentivized on how many steps they take, or at on the job, how many steps are they taking, or they can have some sort of reductions in healthcare costs
Yeah.
because of certain things that they're doing that are really lifestyle changes that are downstatey lifestyle changes that allow you to have less chronic stress, less risk for chronic disease. There's some
Yeah.
very specific things that can be done.
Yeah. Um, Before we start our Q&A, I do have one more question I would love to ask you just because you have access, you've seen so much research being done. What do you feel is the next in the discovery for neuroscience, mindfulness, and sleep, and especially with this downstate, especially after 2 years of pandemic?
I think this is great. I obviously think it's gonna be about the downstate. Um,
Yeah.
so I will say that, one of the things in my research that is new to the field of cognitive neuroscience or just neuroscience, is the important role of the body and of the
Mm,
autonomic nervous system in not just our basic water and power functions of temperature and breathing and keeping us alive, but really having a strong impact on how much daily stress we have, how we, consolidate our long-term memories and process, regulate our emotions. I think that there's been a real focus on the brain, which is great and exciting, and we've got um, incredible new technology, incredible new neuroscience directions that is just focused on the brain. But I think that for the most part, everything below the neck has been ignored
agreed.
by neuroscience. And I think that is where the future lies, is in seeing us as actually one whole body, and all of these systems interact and they work together.
I love that. And I love that I feel hope is very powerful. And that's what that reminds me of is what's next and how will we all work together. And with that, we can start off with some audience Q&A. I believe they'll be popping up. So we have a person who wrote, if it's not possible to undo a bad night's sleep, aka make up for it in the weekend, are there other things we can do? As a parent of young children, I'm not getting much sleep. I've been there.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I have a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. He's just turning 8. So middle of the night awakenings and just the stress of trying to get your be present for your kids, so much so that they don't feel that you're checking your emails, that you're doing something that's dividing your attention. Like, that's obviously where we want to be. um, but it also means that all the other things that we would rather be doing, or not rather, but that we would also like to be doing, such as our work, um, or watching movies, or catching up on um, uh, social media, any of these things, they get pushed to our night.
Mm,
So definitely, um, the number one thing I would say is get to sleep early. The first, this is the thing, it's super annoying to hear. And I remember when I had first my babies, and they say, like, sleep when your baby sleeps, and you just think, of course I'm not going to sleep when my baby. I've got laundry, I've got work to do, I've got all these different things, right? But the truth is that early to bed, you cannot make up that sleep in any other time of night. So whatever you can do to when they go to bed, you can go to bed. Like actually you don't need to watch movies. There's many things that you don't actually need to do. And that you're doing it for yourself, and it's called, I think, bedtime procrastination or something like that. And it's really this feeling of like, this is my only time to myself, and I really want it, right? And so you do these things that are actually against your benefit, but in that moment they feel great. So I would say getting to bed early. But I know also that um, you're going to be up at night anyway, right? Because you have young children. So that doesn't necessarily always help. So the other aspect is, what can you do during the day to
Yeah.
make sure that you're staying physically active, you're doing your restore work, such as the deep breathing, 10 minutes of deep breathing, either 10 minutes in the morning or 10 minutes at night, or 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, increases your heart rate variability, your HRV, which is reflects your restore signals. Um, Doing downstate activities in the middle of the day are incredibly restorative, and they keep that, they help balance out that exhaustion feeling that grows across the day. And actually, taking naps is also really key. Letting yourself take a nap, doing those things during the day that will increase your restore response.
Wow, that's fantastic. Um, and I think we have another question coming in. Would eliminating caffeine intake help the downstate?
Um, so yes, yes, 100%. You don't need to eliminate it completely, though. Some people are there's large differences in sensitivity to caffeine. Definitely, I would eliminate caffeine after noon, because it can stay in your system long enough such that it can be hard to go to sleep if you drink it after noon. But there's nothing inherently wrong with having caffeine in the morning. It's not going to prevent the sleep at night if you just stick with it in the morning. Um, what caffeine is doing is, you know, so you have your energy use across the day is basically building up. And as you use your energy, you have these little adenosine molecules that actually get built up along with that energy use. And the ATP turns to ADP and it poops out adenosine. And that's why adenosine is a very good marker for sleepiness across the day. What caffeine is doing is actually blocking adenosine from hitting your receptors, and it's telling you that you don't have that much adenosine in your system. So it's blocking this natural signal that would otherwise tell you, my upstate is completely full and I need to go to downstate sleep and I need to do these things. So it's really very related to sleep. So that's why I think, it's fine to have it, but just don't have it after noon.
Yeah, I like that because that has that moderation, right? Where it's not that extreme, don't do this, or do 110% of this. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
good.
figuring out where in the upstate can I place this so that it doesn't hurt the downstate to come on, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, another, there's caffeine, but there's also eating, right? So what is all this time restricted eating that people are talking about and this intermittent fasting? What is that doing? It's shortening the window of your upstate eating activity and giving you a big fat downstate, right? So that your metabolism can actually do all the repairing work. That's why the fasting works. And it's not really what people are thinking about because they don't think about themselves as a rhythm, but it's placing your meal in the height of your metabolic system, right? Where it's
yeah,
working at its most powerful. And then not eating, if you eat later and later at night, you will delay your melatonin onset, which is your sleep hormone, right?
yeah,
So eating affects your sleep, exercise affects your sleep. When do you exercise? That's also critical because exercise, just like eating, increases Rev, and you need Restore to come in at some point. But if you have high Rev, you're not going to be able to get to sleep. So there's so many, so that's why it's like, okay, there's caffeine, but there's all these other things that you're doing that are also part of your whole system and will affect your upstate downstate balance.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in your first book, you had, the sleep wheel, the nap wheel, and showing when's the best time to take a nap, and I found that in your new book, it's the when to exercise, what type of exercise, and just what you can do throughout the day to help you tap into the downstate, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. So thank you, for that question, and I believe we may have another 1 or 2 questions. Um, I love this question. Does this mean more rest is needed during the winter months? That's a fantastic question.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about yourself as having seasons, just like the seasons of the year, is really critical, right? Like thinking about that we have spring and summer, and that's the upstate, right? And then there's the fall, sun's going down, and where all of our metabolic processes are decreasing, our mental resources are ebbing, our energy sources are ebbing, and then we go into winter, and that's where we do all of the deep work that can only be done during winter. So, if you talk to farmers, they have this concept where if you don't have a really deep frost, or I think I forgot what they call it, but like they call it some sort of a sleep, deep sleep of some kind, you won't get the same amount of buds and the same power
Oh, interesting.
in the spring, right? Because you need that deep winter to give the plant a deep downstate
A
before
downstate.
it can, so that it has all that, and it's not just dead, right? What it's doing is it's actually building up energy because it takes a lot of energy to produce buds and to produce fruit. And there's the processes that go on during the downstate can only go on during the downstate. We will always um, prioritize upstate stuff, right? Because it's a
Mm,
survival mechanism. Like if food comes in, we're not going to not digest it, right? If there's something to watch on TV, we're not going to not watch it, right? Like we
yeah,
have to intentionally prioritize, and so our bodies need that downstate, but we have to prioritize the downstate. So do we need more sleep in the winter? People do sleep more in the winter for sure, and they also eat differently in the winter, right? There's a different quality to the needs of wintertime, and the type of foods that you get during wintertime, like eating seasonally is a really interesting concept that when we live in, at least California for sure, but most places that have major grocery stores, you never have a sense of like, what is
mhm.
the food in season right now, right? And there is actually really interesting research showing that the food that you eat in the season that it's actually at its ripest is more healthy. It has more of the phytochemicals that make us healthy because we're eating their health, right? We're eating the plant's health. So
Yeah,
when you eat things that are out of season, it's in its dormant state. But that's also, how do you even
that's
learn
interesting. Yeah, yeah,
how
I was
it
gonna say,
is?
yeah, that's a lot to unpack and trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
that's
mean, the farmers market, the CSA, and that approach to winter, I think is really powerful. To
yeah,
really get into the foods of your area and into the and get into the mentality of winter, both in the
yeah,
sleep, in the motion, exercise, and also in how you're eating.
yeah, the restorative. We have a few more questions actually that are coming through. What are your advice in coping with insomnia without taking supplements? And what do you do during the moment of insomnia? Example, continue to lay in bed or do you get up, read a book?
Yeah,
I'm sure not being on a device is one of them, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing about people with insomnia is usually they really don't want to have insomnia. So they really try to do all the things, and that's the thing about insomnia, that um, it's different than other disorders where I think insomnia is so debilitating and so awful that you try anything to
Mm,
get yourself to sleep. So
mm,
it's a big question, right? Are there hacks? Are there hacks to get you to fall asleep? Yes, there's a ton. And, we could talk about a ton of those things. Um, I guess the point of, and I could, tell you, oh, get up out of bed, write down everything, and I have all those tricks in the book too, like eliminate blue light after 6 p.m. and go to sleep at this and this time. And, and there's all the stuff that you would hear, um, from any website that tell you about sleep hygiene, and they're incredibly important, and I 100% say that all those things actually are incredibly important. I guess the part of the what I can contribute that's maybe different is considering your um, sleep and wake and eating and exercise as part of a rhythm,
mm,
and your autonomic system as being part of a larger rhythm that is you, so that it's not just what you're doing right before bed that is going to increase your chances of getting to sleep. It's what you're doing all day long. So when do you exercise, and what type of exercise are you doing, right? When are you eating? When do you stop eating? When are you drinking? And when do you stop drinking? Even any water, right? Like,
yeah,
what are you doing during the day that's actually making it such that your system is waking up at night and then you're tossing and turning, right? So I guess I would like us to start thinking less about these in smaller things that we can do, which I think do help, and it's really great. It's really great to have all these resources, but also what are the larger scale questions that you can do across the whole day, and also psychologically, what are some of the traps
yeah.
that you're letting yourself fall into, that actually maybe really need to be rethought about, or just reestablished as a different way of thinking. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
which goes back to what you said earlier of people done so much research from the neck up, and how do we connect the mind and the body together? Thank
exactly.
you. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Any advice for people who don't have a separate sleep or workspace? Oh, this is a great question. Um, how can we keep the separation from work life, and sleep so we can wind down for the night? Oh, that's a great question to end on.
Yeah, I mean, especially these days, right, where
Mhm.
there's so much that has shifted, with the pandemic of now. Um, I mean, obviously during the pandemic, the onslaught of new experiences of living where you work and where you sleep and where your children do their schoolwork and where they sleep. That is a major. It's a major thing to get used to, right? It's a major new experience. So one of the one of the ways that, psychologically, what we need to do is not bring is create a specific sacred space for the bed,
Mhm.
and as much as possible to have, whatever psychological shift that we can make between the space that we're working and the space that we're either sleeping, you know, reading something that's going to put us to sleep, or having sex, right? So we want to have that sleep area be psychologically different
Yeah.
than the area where we're having difficult meetings or looking about our spreadsheets and our budgets and our this and our that, right? We want to, or looking at social media that drives us crazy, right? People posting and you want to just post back. So, ideally you would have two separate spaces, but in some cases you really don't have that option, right? Some people live in a studio or they have a bedroom in a house. And where else are they going to be but in their room? So it becomes, it becomes important to psychologically create barriers between those two spaces. Maybe it's you have like one daytime comforter, and then one nighttime, right? That you create a division where you put up some sort of a divide where you just don't even see that bed during the day, and then you don't even see that desk at night. So that you're and creating the division of sound. You can also have a certain type of sound that's a daytime sound, and a certain type of sound that's more of a downstate sound that just puts you in that relaxed state. It's a self hypnosis um, of both the context, and also your own interpretation of the context into upstates and downstates.
I love that because that's an actionable thing that somebody can do, which I think is so powerful. Um, I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. If you just want to share where people can connect and contact you, feel
Sure.
free to. Yeah,
Okay, Ravi, thank you so much.
you're
And
welcome.
everyone else that helped organize this that I just met before, I think there was Nadia and Michelle and other people, but thank you very much. And all the people who are working in the tech backstage, thank you so much. My website is just my name, www.saramednick.com. And there you can pre-order the book. The book is coming out April 19th. And pre-orders are very helpful for authors. So in case you want to pre-order, that's great. And yeah, and I, usually try to post things I'm also on Twitter, Sara_Mednick. And I try to tweet, daily. So that would be a fun way to connect too.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Mednick. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was a pleasure on my end too. Thank you.
Thanks.